Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. It's time for UFO Part 2. Hello, welcome back. My name is Paul Mount. This is my world of stuff. If you are new here, are you being attracted and drawn in like a fly into a spider's web by the promise of talk about Gerry Anderson's UFO, then why not like and subscribe to the channel? It's the only thing to do. It's the only sane and rational thing to do, really, if you're interested in cult TV, cult films, bit of Doctor Who, physical media, all that sort of stuff. It's all here. It's all here, your one-stop shop for the best in genre entertainment, classic and new, but mainly classic. Few new subscribers dribbling in over the last few days. Welcome to you. Please stick around. So as I said, like and subscribe if you're new. And just stick around because there's loads of interesting stuff here, particularly part 2 of UFO. In my first video, and thank you to everybody who watched the video, and thank you to everybody, of course, who leaves comments down below, because they're always appreciated, particularly in a show like UFO, which to me is almost like blood in my veins. I can watch a UFO episode anytime. I know the episode's inside out and backwards and forwards. And it's always interesting to read comments from people who don't know the show that well, or have forgotten it, or watch it and liked it, but don't know a great deal about the history of it. And that's one of the things I like to do on this channel when I do my retrospectives. Just put shows into context, how they came about, the production process, just things that fans will know about. And I know that in my UFO video, hardcore fans of UFO will have learned very little, if anything, new. But for casual viewers, I like to think that there's a bit of information that they'll take away from the videos about the making of TV shows over the years. So in the first part of my UFO retrospective, I just looked at the whole series. And in this particular part, as promised / threatened, I'm going to look at my top 6 UFO episodes. I have no idea why I've picked 6 out of 26 episodes. Could have done 5, could have done 10. Thought I'd be a bit different and do 6. And when I was editing my original video, I realised that there's quite a lot of me going, well, actually, it's quite slow. And actually, there are pacing problems. And it's a bit clunky. And it genuinely sounds as if I don't like this show very much. And I really, really do. I absolutely love UFO, the visual aesthetic of it, the colour schemes, the vibrancy of it. The fact that it still, in a way, looks ahead of its time, despite some certain dated elements in relation to music and fashions and things that do date it somewhat. It has an energy about it that makes it seem still like a contemporary adventure show. So I do apologise if my narrative in the last video came across as negative in places, but I like to sort of point out where shows might have failings and things, but it doesn't stop these particular series being any less adored by me, and I absolutely adore UFO. So let's talk about my top 6 favourite episodes. This might be contentious or controversial because there are other episodes that I know are very highly regarded, but I'm just picking 6 episodes that, to me, sum up the series and what it did and what its ambition was and the things that it strived to do and was successful in doing at a time when TV shows weren't doing this sort of thing. And looking at my list when I compiled it, I suddenly realised that this is a very different list to the one I would have compiled as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old watching this series for the first time, when all I wanted to see was the UFOs in space, the interceptors attacking them, skydiver launching, the mobiles, all the hardware, the Gerry Anderson hardware and technology that we're so used to, that fantastic model work. That was what I wanted to see. I wasn't interested in characters and relationships and getting deep into the psyche of particularly the lead character, Ed Straker, played so mesmerisingly by Ed Bishop. But when I rewatched the series over the years, other episodes came along from the background that I hadn't necessarily rated that highly when I watched it as a kid. And I suddenly realised how clever they are as pieces of writing and how sophisticated in terms of what they were doing with the narrative of UFO, because it's almost non-linear in a way. Some of the episodes were shown in different orders, and certain things happen in episodes that are referenced a bit later on. In terms of Straker, because as I mentioned in the first video, Straker is the only 3D character in the series, really. He's the only one who is defined and has a background and a personality obsessive as it is. One of the issues about UFO, of course, is the transmission order, because, as I mentioned in the previous video, it was never shown in any specific order. TV shows in these days weren't made that way. They were made to be shown. As long as you showed the first episode or two that established the show, the rest were fair game, and you could show any episode out of order, because there was very little in the way of continuity, very little in the way of back referencing to previous episodes or previous things that had happened. So these film shows were designed to be shown in any old order, almost as if, as I've said before, I think the network showing them just said, oh, it's UFO, grabbed an episode off the shelf and shoved it into the video player. I'm sure it wasn't quite like that, but it often came across that way. And particularly with UFO, when it went to the networks in the UK, it was all over the place. Episodes were shown in different orders. There were gaps. They moved to different time slots. So it's always been very hard for UFO completists to come up with an agreed original and proper transmission order. So the dates that I'm giving for the episodes that I'm referring to today are the first UK broadcast on any network. Now, I don't know what network showed these episodes on these dates, but these are the dates that they made their debuts on UK television. Now, as I mentioned again in the last video, I first saw UFO about 2 years later, so these dates have no reference to my viewing of the show. But that's UFO for you. It's scattergun. It's been scattergun in the way it's been shown and distributed over the years. VHS releases were in different orders. I think there might be different orders on the DVDs and Blu-rays. I haven't checked that. All I can do in relation to the transmission of these episodes is just give you the dates that they were first shown in the UK, wherever that was. And these 6 episodes are ones which I've enjoyed based on that sort of sci-fi, Anderson-esque, Derek Meddings model special effects spectacular, plus interesting character pieces about Ed Straker. So, in reverse order, my number 6 favourite UFO episode is a very silly one. It's a very silly one from that last production block. Now, I mentioned in the original retrospective video how UFO was made in 2 blocks. Not intentionally, but that's the way it fell because of studio availability. First 17 episodes filmed at MGM in Boreham Wood. Then about 5 months later, the show moved over to Pinewood to record its last 9 episodes. And one of those 9 episodes is one which figures in my list at number 6 because it is so daft. When you look at the story, it makes absolutely no sense at all. But as a youngster looking for spectacle and excitement, Reflections in the Water. This is a good, fun spectacle story that's full of all that special effects stuff that I love. Bit of action and a bit of intrigue, although the intrigue is extremely silly. The aliens have set up a base underwater, an underwater dome, which Shadow discover. Straker and Colonel Foster, remember Ed Straker now, played by Ed Bishop, he's in his second run of episodes. He is a bit more of an action man. He gets more involved in the running and shooting and punching and so on. He and Foster travel in skydiver, underwater, discover this dome. They've been suspicious about this dome. They look into the dome and they see one of their own Shadow operatives, played by James Cosmo. Yes, that James Cosmo, very early in his career, playing Lieutenant Anderson, Shadow operative, who appears to be in this dome. It appears that he's a spy, giving secrets to the aliens about Shadow, but he knows nothing about this. He's interrogated, he's given Shadow's truth serum, but he knows nothing about this underwater dome. Straker and Foster return to the dome and break in, and it's sort of membranous type walls, like veins. The truth of it is, it was a very cheap set because towards the end of UFO's production, the money was starting to get a little bit tight. So they had to economise where possible. But in creating these sort of weird membranous corridors, it looks quite alien, and there's all these coloured lights behind it and strange, surreal sound effects, which does help that feeling of this is an alien environment. They discover in this complex a complete replica of Shadow HQ and alien duplicates who appear to have been given plastic surgery to look like Shadow control operatives, and they have Shadow uniforms. The whole complex is a complete replica of Shadow HQ, and they are there sending messages to Moonbase and Skydiver telling them not to engage with a wave of UFOs that are approaching Earth. 25 UFOs are massing and approaching Earth. Receiving these messages, Moonbase and Skydiver stand down and they don't prepare to launch when the UFOs attack, and then another wave of UFOs arrive. Eventually, Shadow destroys the base and they mobilise their hardware and they destroy the wave of UFOs. What I liked about this as a youngster was all the spectacle. There was this fantastic battle scene at the end, which is repeated in another episode, unfortunately. But it's got lots of space scenes. It's the interceptors firing missiles and explosions. You've got all the intrigue about the underwater stuff, the skydiving. It's got a really nice mix of these great special effects scenes. But the story itself, when you think about what the aliens are doing, they've gone to the trouble of building a replica of Shadow HQ in a dome underwater. They have recorded Shadow broadcasts and lip-sync the aliens so that the aliens appear to be saying these words. But they're broadcasting these on radio. There's no video contact. So all they needed to do was record these words and play them on a radio broadcast. There was absolutely no need for this artifice of building this replica of Shadow. So it's utterly nonsense from that point of view. But as a 12-year-old, that didn't really matter because it was exciting. There was a couple of fights, which you didn't get a lot of on UFO. Straker and Foster fighting a couple of duplicates. In fact, Straker fights a duplicate of Foster at one point. And it has a really nice pace to it. It has that energy that I mentioned that those last 9 episodes had that's often missing in the earlier episodes. So despite the fact that it's nuts from the perspective of a story, it's really engaging to watch, and it's fast and fun, and there's a great chemistry between Straker and Foster, and although the story makes absolutely no sense really, no practical sense, it's a UFO spectacle, and it's a great fun episode, and there's a nice pace to it. So that's Reflections in the Water, which incidentally was first transmitted in the UK on the 24th of July 1970, and it was actually episode 24 in the original broadcast run. It's interesting looking at the broadcast run. If you look at those 26 episodes, you don't get the 17 episodes, then the 9. The 9 are dotted throughout the series, which I think probably makes sense because I think watching them in the original order that we know they were made, you would notice much more the differences between those last episodes and the early ones. So I think it's quite sensible that they put those pacier episodes in amongst the 17 MGM episodes. My number 5 episode. Number 5 takes us right back to the beginning. It's the very first episode of UFO, first broadcast on the 16th of September in the UK. It's Identified, written by Gerry and Sylvia Anderson and directed by Gerry Anderson. This is the one that sets up the series. I mentioned it in some detail in the retrospective, so I won't say too much about it here, but it lays down the foundations of the whole series, and it explores the idea of the series, the creation of Shadow, that brief flashback sequence at the beginning, the sequence with Peter Carling and his sister, which links up to the end of the episode. And we see pretty much all Shadow's hardware in action as a UFO attacks to get hold of this radar equipment that Shadow are requisitioning. So you get UFO action, skydiver action, the interceptors, and Straker explaining the format of the series as we go along. It's, as I mentioned in that original video, it's slightly clunky in terms of dumping the information into the episode, but I think it does a generally good job in setting up what's in store for the series and where we're going to go with it. That's Identified, episode 1, which is my number 5. My number 4 is an episode that was screened in July 1970, the 31st of July. It was the 25th episode, the penultimate episode in the original running order, and this is a Straker-based episode. This shows what happens when Straker's not around, basically. It's an interesting story that involves sort of espionage, and it puts George Sewell's Alec Freeman sort of centre stage for a change when he has to take control of Shadow, when Ed Straker has to go off to intercept a newspaper reporter who has interviewed him and threatens to expose Shadow to the world. This is a Straker-heavy story. This is an episode which looks into the character of Straker and the sacrifices that he has to make. He sets Shadow aside to find this girl who's recorded an interview with him, but the interview tape was left running at a time when an important Shadow radio broadcast was transmitting on Straker's intercom. So she's picked up all this information which threatens to expose Shadow to the world. Straker follows this girl, he finds out where she is, but they form a bit of a relationship and they're attracted to one another, and eventually Straker takes her back to his home. They're about to do the deed when he realises that he can't, and he thinks that she's going to betray him, and he again sets aside his own desires as a human being because Shadow comes first. And it's interesting that it dives into that, and you see a sort of a sadness in Ed Straker when he realises that this is his life, this is the life he's made for himself, and that he can't really go back. He has to put every ounce of his energy and his focus into Shadow, and his own personal life doesn't matter. It's a really good, strong episode. It has a sub-theme about Alec Freeman and how he struggles to control Shadow and make the right decisions. And it makes you and him realise the difficult position that Straker's in, because he has to make difficult decisions every day. And Alec Freeman finds that hard to come to terms with. So at the end of the episode, he's quite pleased to pass the responsibility seat back to Straker. That's my number 4 episode. My number 3 episode. Written by Alan Patterlow and directed by David Lane, who's a regular director on the show. It's episode 10 from the original run, shown on the 9th of December 1970. It's called The Square Triangle. This is another moral dilemma type story, which features 2 characters played by Adrian Corry and Patrick Mower. Adrian Corry is married to a character played by character actor Alan Cuthbertson. But she and Patrick Mower's character Cass are having an affair, and they live in a cottage out in the countryside, and they are plotting to kill Adrian Corry's husband so that they can be together. They have a plot arranged whereby he'll be shot as he comes into the house. They get to make out it was a burglar. Meanwhile, a UFO has landed nearby, and into the house stumbles an alien, and they become involved in the Shadow operation. This presents Shadow with a dilemma, because they've foiled this murder plot, but they have to use Shadow's memory drug, sort of a retcon drug that they use on people who become involved or find out about Shadow. They administer this memory drug that wipes out their knowledge of Shadow. So at the end of the episode, Straker is faced with the decision of wiping these people's memories of what happened with the alien, but he can't stop them going back to their original plan to kill Adrian Corry's husband. So it is a square triangle with these characters stuck in it, that they end up back where they started. And a lot of commentators about the episode have felt it was ambiguous what happened afterward. But I think it's quite obvious, because the end credits, which normally play over a shot of the moon and some sort of mournful Barry Gray music, here the credits roll over a shot of Adrian Corry in a graveyard, looking at a gravestone and then walking away back towards Cass, which suggests that they went back to their plan and they did kill her husband in the end. So it's a really interesting story, in that Shadow can't get involved in the day-to-day affairs of ordinary people, no matter what they're doing, no matter how criminal their activities may be. Shadow's imperative is to protect the world from the aliens, and the difficult decision is made that they have to remove the alien from the equation, but leave the humans to do what humans do. Really good story. Really interesting moral story. That's my number 3. Here's my number 2, and this would leave 12-year-old me absolutely aghast, because this is an episode that I absolutely detested at the time it was on. I thought it was boring, dreary, talky, because there was none of the UFO hardware in it. It didn't even have the classic title sequence. This is Confetti Check A-OK, which was episode 22 of the original transmission run. It was screened originally 10th of July 1971. This is a brilliant character piece of Ed Bishop's Straker. Stunningly detailed and very unusual for this type of film series to tell this type of story and to go into this sort of depth about the characters, which starts off with a scene in Shadow HQ where a Shadow operative is celebrating the birth of his first daughter, and there's cigars all round. Straker comes in, he's given a cigar to celebrate, and suddenly flashes back to 1969, 1970, when Shadow is about to be formed. The story is a flashback then to Ed getting married to his wife Mary, played by Suzanne Neve, and their courtship, their marriage, and the development of their relationship. And because Straker at this point is at the genesis of Shadow, and he's there at the beginning of Shadow and putting it all together, he can't tell his wife what he's doing. As far as she's concerned, he's involved in the government, but he's away all hours, he's out, he's missing. And we see scenes set in Shadow HQ when it's being built. We see meetings between Straker and various Shadow operatives in civvies, just making their plans to create and put Shadow together. His wife gets suspicious. She's lonely, she's on her own. But eventually there's some happiness because she falls pregnant, and it seems to bring them together again. But Ed is still torn away from his family, still distant. And in the end, she hires a private investigator to follow him, try and find out what's going on. And this investigator happens to take some pictures of Ed Straker with Nina Barry, played by Dolores Mantis, becomes one of the Moonbase operatives. He's actually going to a pre-Shadow meeting with her and some other Shadow staff. But of course, Ed's wife sees these pictures and just assumes that Ed's having an affair. There's a confrontation, she's pregnant, she falls down the stairs. But at the hospital, it becomes clear to Straker that they have to part, they can't stay together, he can't tell her what he's doing. That's Confetti Check A-OK, which is a great piece of human drama. I suppose a lot of critics today, as they do with Doctor Who, if there's anything domestic, it's like a soap opera. And I suppose it is. It does have those soap opera elements of relationships and childbirth and potential affairs and so on. But it has this science fiction backdrop that we know from the rest of the series. And we know what it leads to, and we know why Straker is so completely obsessed. But this is the first sign of him becoming ice cold, detached, prepared to make any kind of sacrifice. He sacrifices his marriage to his wife in this particular episode. And that leads on to what happens in my number one episode. My number one is episode 5 from the original run, transmitted on the 14th of October 1970. It's written by Tony Barrick and directed again by David Lane. It's called A Question of Priorities. This is a companion piece to the much later Confetti Check A-OK. At this point in the story, where in 1980, Shadow's in full operation, but Straker still spends time with his young son. He's got a son with his wife. They are long since divorced. She now lives with a new man, played by Philip Maddock, incidentally. And Ed has taken his son to Harlington Straker Studios, that he's the sort of manager of, or the director of. And they have a fun day exploring the props and the sets and so on. He takes his son Johnny home. Relationship with his wife's a bit frosty, so Johnny runs in to show Ed this model plane he's put together. Ed decides to leave before he has a confrontation with his wife and John Rutland, her new husband, and he drives away. As he drives away, unfortunately, Johnny runs out of the house to show Ed the plane, runs into the road and is knocked over by another car. He's rushed to hospital, he's seriously ill, he's in a coma, it's not looking good. Straker discovers that there are some drugs in America that can save his life, so he requisitions a Shadow transporter plane to rush the drugs over from America. Meanwhile, a UFO has slipped through Shadow's defences and landed in Ireland. An alien is on the loose. It's broken into the house of an old woman, and it's set up some sort of transceiver. It's sending out a signal. Shadow's picked up this signal. They know where the alien is. Straker is faced with a difficult choice. The only Shadow vehicle in the area is the transporter that's flying the drugs across to the UK. He agonises, but he makes a difficult decision that intercepting the alien is his priority, and he sends the transporter to Ireland. And there's an interesting sort of sub-theme here, that this is an alien that's trying to contact Shadow because it's defected from the alien homeworld. It wants to make contact with Shadow, it wants to form an alliance perhaps with Shadow, but they destroy the alien. The transporter carries on its way. Straker rushes to the hospital, but his son has died, and there's a sort of a tearful sequence at the end where his wife is led away by her husband, and she screams to Ed, "I never want to see you again." And it's a very tough episode because, again, it shows what Straker has become. It shows that his own life and his own blood doesn't matter in his ongoing battle with the aliens, and his position of command at Shadow, it comes first. It has to come first. So those two episodes, my number one and number two, are very much, I suppose you could say, almost like a two-parter. Confetti Check A-OK is Ed meeting his wife, their relationship falling apart, her becoming pregnant, and then 10 years later, Question of Priorities, although it was shown earlier, is the sequel, when it shows how, once again, Ed sacrifices his family for the sake of his job. So those are my top 6 UFO episodes, and as I've said, it is interesting that they're more character-based ones than the action adventure that many of the episodes are. And there are some great episodes, and I will mention some close runners-up. But there are so many really good episodes that are fascinating to watch and thrilling and full of action and UFO action and special effects and so on. But I think these 6 for me are ones that do focus a bit more on character. And as I said, as I've got older, I suppose, I now appreciate things that look into characters and the human condition a bit more than just the flash and bang of the special effects. My runner-up episodes then, as I said, there's so many good episodes here. Runner-up episodes, and I've not got the dates of transmission for these, I'm just going to mention them in passing. Exposed, which is episode 2 in the running order. This is the one that introduces Paul Foster, played by Michael Billington. He plays a test pilot who gets involved in a skydiver clash with a UFO. His plane crashes, his co-pilot is killed. He's convinced that he saw something, and he's filmed it, a UFO, but when he retrieves the film, the UFO has been deleted, and he becomes involved in this conspiracy to cover up what's happening. And there are twists and duplicity and things going on. Eventually, he discovers what's going on, and he is enrolled into Shadow because he has shown and demonstrated the versatility and determination that is required in a Shadow officer. And Paul Foster becomes a major member of Shadow. I also enjoyed the episode The Psycho Bombs. Now, somebody in a comment in my previous video hoped that it would be in my top 6. It very nearly was. Very nearly was. This is one of the, again, later run of episodes, and you can tell because of the pace of it. It features 3 random characters played by Mike Pratt from Randall and Hopkirk, character actor David Collins, and the actress Deborah Grant. They're 3 ordinary members of the public who are hypnotized by a UFO and turned into almost zombies, automatons, who are subliminally instructed by the aliens to destroy key Shadow complexes. I believe that there's a skydiver enclosure, there's a radar tracking station, and eventually Shadow HQ itself. The plot is foiled, of course. Eventually, Shadow HQ is saved. It's one of those episodes that suggest that the aliens are using different tactics now. It's not just about flinging UFOs at the Earth. They're using the abilities they have and the technology they have to influence human activity. And that's an interesting thing which filters through a couple of episodes. You do wonder why they didn't try this again, because it was 2/3 successful, and you think if they did the same thing with some other people, they would have got there in the end. But with all these plots, the aliens do it once and then never try it again. But it's a really good, exciting episode because there's a real sense of danger, especially when 2 of these missions seem to go well. And even though we know Shadow HQ isn't going to be destroyed, there is some genuine excitement in what's going to happen in this and how are they going to stop these people carrying out the wishes of the aliens. That's the Psycho Bombs. I also enjoyed The Man Who Came Back. That's another one of those later episodes. This features Darren Nesbitt as Craig Collins, an astronaut who's gone missing in the jungle for months. He's one of Ed Straker's best friends. He too has been influenced by the aliens. His character has changed. He's slightly different. He's a bit harder, a bit more cynical, a bit gruffer. He clashes with Paul Foster. He's previously had a relationship with Colonel Lake, played by Wanda Ventham, but in his absence, she's now become close to Paul Foster. So there's a sort of triangle going on there. And ultimately, he's involved in a plot to try and kill Straker. And I'll leave it there. But it's a really good, tense episode with a very powerful performance from Darren Nesbitt, who brings a real edge to his character. Good episode. I also enjoyed Computer Affair. This is one of the early episodes in production. Again, this is a sort of a character-based thing. This is about Shadow's attitude towards its staff forming relationships with one another. This comes across when Gay Ellis on Moonbase hesitates during a interceptor confrontation with an alien, and she makes a decision which causes the destruction of an interceptor and the death of a pilot because of her attraction to a pilot called Mark Bradley, played by Harry Baird. And the episode looks at sort of psychological effects of Shadow operatives who are supposed to be ruthless and focused on their mission when they do have feelings for one another. And there's a slight ambiguity in the end about whether there actually is anything between Gay Ellis and Bradley, but it's a nicely judged piece, and it's got some really good action scenes. This is a really good episode for fans of the Shadow mobiles, because the UFO crash lands in Canada and the mobiles have to go into action, and there's some nice outdoor location scenes filmed at Black Park in Pinewood with an alien stalking the Shadow pilots through the woods. It's a good episode that balances human drama and Shadow action drama, so Computer Affair is a good one. Time Lash is another good one. This is a sort of crazy late season episode where the aliens have now stopped time around Shadow HQ and Harlington Straker Studios. Straker and Colonel Lake return to Shadow HQ to find that everything in the studios and Shadow itself is frozen, in a moment of time. There's some really good visual effects in this, and there's a shadow operative played by Patrick Allen who sort of chases them around the shadow backlot. This again was an episode that was made fairly cheaply because the money was running out, so they just filmed it at Pinewood, used all the props and gadgets of Pinewood to have a big runaround with lots of explosions and fights and gunshots and things. Didn't require any extra cast or extra sets. I think once you know that it was a slightly cash-strapped episode, you know, because there's not a lot of sort of classic UFO effects work. But it's really nice visually. There's some very clever visual bits in it. So it's a good pacey late run episode, Time Lash. And another one from that late run is called The Sound of Silence. This involves a UFO that crashes into a lake near a farm run by a family which includes brother and sister Susan Jameson and Michael Jaston. There's an alien on the loose in the forestry nearby. Shadow get involved and try and find out where the UFO is, and Michael Jason's character disappears, and we discover that he's been abducted by the aliens. It's a good, rattlingly good episode. It's got great guest performances by Susan Jameson and Michael Jaston. And anecdote coming up, a few years ago, in fact 2017, I went to the second UFO con at the Quad in Derby. Of course, one of the tragedies of UFO is that most of the main cast are no longer with us, so there's very few people still alive behind the scenes or in front of the cameras who can talk about the show. But the guests were Michael Jaston and Susan Jameson, who were talking about this episode. Of course, as actors, this was a job they did in 1969 for a couple of weeks. And their memories of it were still very strong, but I think they were both sort of pleasantly surprised that this episode is well remembered and this performance is so well remembered. And it was really interesting to see Michael Jaston, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, on stage talking about this. And I remember asking him a question, something to do with the acting profession. And a couple of months later, I was working at BBC in Cardiff, working as an extra in an episode of Casualty. Michael Jaston was a guest member of cast. I was pleased to see him there. I'd seen him a few weeks before. And in the lunch break, we were walking towards the canteen at the BBC. Usually the actors go back to their dressing rooms, but he decided to wander into the canteen. And I was in front of him, and I held the door open for him to go through. And I just happened to mention I'd been at this UFO convention and really enjoyed seeing him. And he invited me to have lunch with him. So we sat at the table with Michael Jaston having lunch at the BBC canteen. And I looked across, and my fellow supporting artist who I'd been with the other day was sort of staring at me, thinking, what's he doing? How's he done that? And I had a really nice chat with Michael Jaston. He was a really nice chap, and I was very sad to hear about his passing. There are always duds in any series, of course. UFO has a few, not many. And even though they're duds, they're sort of watchable, but they're not very exciting. There's an episode called Close Up, which takes 50 minutes to get the message across that things look different if you look at them closely. It's all about perspective and camera angles and stuff like that. It's a bit dull. There's an episode called Conflict, which is basically about Straker's mission to clear up space debris because aliens are using all the clutter up in space as cover to make their way to Earth. And then there's a slightly dull episode called Destruction, which is all about aliens blowing up a ship and toxic waste disappears into the sea. It's slightly dull. And they're worth watching, but they're not the paciest of episodes, even amongst those 17 episodes which often have pacing issues. So that's my little rundown of my favourite episodes of UFO. I'll be very interested to hear what yours are, so please leave a message down below. Let me know what your favourite episodes are. As I said, I think you can watch any episode of UFO and it's not a waste of 50 minutes. Even the slightly drearier ones look great and they have a style about them that always makes it a compelling piece of viewing. So I'll be interested to hear what your particular selections are, any favourites or any particular memories from the show. Always love to hear that sort of stuff from people whose memories are reawoken by these videos. That's one of the reasons I do these things. So yes, please leave a message down below. As I said earlier, if you are new here, you might as well like and subscribe because this is the place for Cult TV. And also, if you've been admiring my gorgeous t-shirt, there's a link down below where you can get hold of one at a very reasonable price, and you too can keep taking the stuff. I'll see you soon.